I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey lurkers, welcome to episode 21. Today we're going to be discussing some of the investigations I've done on the Gettysburg Battlefield, and I will be sharing with you stories about those investigations and including some EVP that we were able to record during these investigations. I have been investigating the Gettysburg Battlefield on and off for about 30 years, not quite, just about 30 years. It was my introduction into paranormal investigation. So when I was able to drive, when I got my license, that's where I started going. I had been reading things on the internet about ghost hunting, and that's where I went. I would take things like a film camera. I took my boombox at one time, which I mentioned in an episode previously. I would take like a compass, very basic tools. I did not really start out with anything fancy. And I would go to the battlefield to see what I was able to observe or pick up or record. So just a word of warning, the Gettysburg Battlefield at one time was open until 10 p.m. at night. However, they have recently changed the times and the park closes 30 minutes after sunset. Please do not go to the park late at night. You will get fined. It used to be $75 a person. I don't know if that's still the same amount, but don't do it. It is actually patrolled quite heavily because there has been some issues with vandalism in the past. And there are a lot of roads through there, so somebody will see you, you will get fined, and you will give ghost hunters a bad name. So please just don't do it. And I did want to just give you a little bit of insight into the Battle of Gettysburg. Not a lot. We're not going to go in a giant history lesson with the battle. Most of you probably are slightly familiar with it. So Gettysburg is located in south central Pennsylvania. It's about 15 or 20 minutes north of the Maryland-Pennsylvania line, which is also known as the Mason-Dixon line. The battle took place July 1st to July 3rd in 1863. At the end of the battle, there were more than 50,000 estimated casualties. And I want to stress, please do not confuse the word casualty with the word fatality. Many people confuse the two and they think that over 50,000 people died. That is not what I'm saying here. Casualties include killed in action, missing in action, and wounded. So not all of those people died. It was a 3-day engagement, and it was considered the bloodiest single battle of the war. It was also considered the turning point of the Civil War. It was a Union victory. It basically ended Confederate General Robert E. Lee's quest to invade the North. He wanted to bring the Civil War to the northern part of the United States, basically over the Mason-Dixon line. He thought if he could win a battle over the Mason-Dixon line in the North, that would force the Union to negotiate and end the war. And it would be a Confederate victory. And our world would look totally different. But he didn't win. And instead, the Union won. But when the Confederate Army was retreating, General Meade, who was the Union general, he failed to pursue the retreating troops. If he had pursued them, he would have been able to corner them and ultimately force Lee to surrender. And the war would have been over in 1863 instead of 1865. So that's just a brief overview of the Gettysburg Battle. Union won, Confederates lost. July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. That's all you need to know. I am going to give you a little bit of a background in each of the locations that I'm going to discuss. The first area that I'm going to talk about is referred to as Spangler Spring. Ghost hunting wise, this was always a very active area of the battlefield. We pretty much had some type of experience each time we went. Now, when we would investigate, you would have nights that you would have a lot of evidence recorded. So by that I mean you would get a lot of EVP, or known as electronic voice phenomena for anybody who's not familiar. And you would have like a lot of EVP, you'd get photos with things, you'd have EMF detector readings, so electromagnetic field readings, temperature changes, things like that. So you'd be getting a lot of readings on your equipment. You would have things showing up in your equipment. And then there would be nights when you would have absolutely nothing show up on your equipment, but then it would be active in the sense that you would hear things or see things, sometimes apparitions, you would hear gunfire, you could smell the cordite burning, which is in gunpowder. So it was either or. And then some nights you had like a mixture of the two. Spangler Spring always seemed to have something going on. Spangler Spring is named for an actual natural spring that is there in the area. It was occupied by each side during the battle. So at one point the Confederates occupied it, at another point the Union occupied it. And there is an old guide tale that used to say that at night, each side, the Confederates and the Union, would meet at the spring to get water and trade things like tobacco. And in this particular area, there was a lot of brother against brother fighting. There were people from Maryland who were in the Confederate Army, people from Maryland who were in the Union Army, and they were kind of in this area. So you also had people who were trading information about family members. Is that true? I'm not sure. It's called an old guide tale, an old guide story. And these stories came about when they had the reunion well after the war had ended. And there were still veterans of the Civil War, specifically the Battle of Gettysburg, from both sides who were coming together to meet for this reunion. So they were trying to create a sense of unity by telling these stories. But it's a great story, and I'm going to go with it. As I said, it was actually a natural spring there. And in 1895, the War Department ended up constructing a permanent stone and concrete cover over the spring because it was being damaged by heavy use by park visitors. Visitors were actually able to drink from the spring using a metal dipper and a small trap door. But then when the National Park Service took over the battlefield, they decided to stop this due to concerns with groundwater contamination. The 1895 structure is still in place. You can't get water anymore. For those who are big in historical thing, there are actually 3 bronze plaques that have a inscription that reads, "Spangler Spring, one country and one flag. The strife of brothers is past. The spring supplied Union and Confederate soldiers with water during the battle." So that's just a quick little information about the spring there. As I said, it was a very active location when we would do our investigations. If you recall, if you've listened to episode 16, My Son Who Saw Dead People, or episode 18 about shadow people, then you've heard stories already about the Spangler Spring location. If you haven't listened to those, I suggest you go check those out. Go back and listen to episode 16 and episode 18 for those. There's lots of stuff that happens in the spring. At one time, while we were there investigating, my mom, and what's funny about this is that she always said she never saw anything. She would go ghost hunting. She enjoyed going, but she doesn't feel that she's very sensitive to those sort of things, and she never really experienced anything. However, in Spangler Spring, she actually witnessed a lantern light walking down the one road. If you're standing looking at the spring, the parking area would be to your right, and there is a road that runs behind the spring and goes down past the bathrooms. While we were there one day, she was watching and she sees this lantern light come from around the corner where the road has gone into the woods, and she sees it coming down the road. And she's watching it, and she's waiting for a person to appear once they come into view. And she's waiting, and she's waiting, and she's waiting. And in the area where she expects to see a person carrying a lantern or some sort of light, there is nobody there. The light's walking by itself, and it ends up going out. This was seen on more than one occasion, but it's the one thing that my mom did see that she was pretty excited about. There's also a pair of gray pants that are seen in this area, and there's actually a Dr. Seuss story about, I think it's a pair of green pants with nobody in them, and my son actually, that was one of his favorite stories to read because he knew the story of the gray pants. Basically, it's a pair of gray pants that are walking around. There's no upper body, there's no feet, there's nothing and no one in them. It's just a pair of what looks like a pair of gray pants walking around. I have never actually had the opportunity to witness this phenomena. but several people in my group have. This is also the area where the famous woman in white has appeared to people in Spangler Spring. Now, when the woman in white appears, there's a couple things that go along with this. She's said to create a sense of extreme sadness. So people who witness her actually take on the emotion of feeling extremely sad. It's not their emotion, they're just feeling the emotion that's going on. She's glowing, she's in white, and the story is that she was meeting her lover there near the spring, and he had promised to marry her. And then, of course, he ended up having to marry somebody else because, like, she was from the wrong side of the tracks or whatever. I'm not really sure. But for whatever reason, they couldn't marry. And he had to marry this other woman. And so he basically dumped her. And she ingested poison and is said to have died there in his arms. I don't really know that that's very truthful. Makes for an awesome story. Totally explains the woman in white, but I don't really hold a lot of store in the fact that this is an actual true account. The woman in white is said to appear anytime there's been some sort of promise that has been broken, similar to the promise that was broken in her life and what caused her to take her life. She shows up a lot of times, like if there's a big deal peace treaty that's been broken. Anytime any major promises have been broken, I would imagine this is why she's seen so much, because every time you turn around, a politician breaks their promise. There have been a few pretty extreme experiences that happened in the spring. They happened to my sister, my brother, and myself. And I'm going to tell you the stories, and I'm going to tell you, I don't really care if you believe me or not. I know what happened. I know what I experienced, and I do not need anybody to validate it for me. I don't need anybody to critique it for me. I know what happened, and it doesn't matter to me if you believe me. I always like to preface this story with that because it's a little out there. And anyway, let me tell you the story. So we're in Spangler Spring, and my sister was with us, and she started acting oddly. She's very quiet, and my mom is talking to her, standing right next to her, talking to her, and my sister is not responding. And my mom's like, "Carrie, are you listening to me?" And my sister turns her head and looks at my mom and says, "I'm so cold," and she starts crying. So everybody freaks out that's there in the group, and they're like, "We need to leave." I was a little irritated because we go there to have experiences, and here my sister seems to be sort of possessed, and I'm like, why are we leaving? She's not hurting anybody or herself. Let's see how this is going to play out. I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking. No offense, Carrie. But, we're there to kind of experience things and to figure out what's going on. So why would we leave? So I guess everybody was afraid she was being possessed or something. So we leave, and she gets out of the area, snaps out of it, and she's fine. And we go have ice cream, and everybody's happy. So it's, a few weeks later, we're back in the spring, and we have a much larger group. We always had a group of people. We would always go ghost hunting on a Saturday evening. We would meet for dinner, we'd ghost hunt, and then we would go and have ice cream at the Lincoln Diner. I think I mentioned that in a previous episode. So in addition to the people who would normally be there, my brother has joined us, which he went on and off with us. He brought one of his friends, and I was there. We had, my cousin was there. The person I had been dating at the time was there. In fact, he was actually my fiance. My brother had brought his guitar, and we set one of our digital recorders on the guitar. My brother said that if you want to play the guitar, go ahead. We're going to leave this recorder just to record. If you want to say something or play the guitar, it'll pick up on it. That's similar to what he said. Unfortunately, I do not have a copy of the EVP that we were able to get. I'm not sure if it's still on my mother's recorder or not. The guitar is sitting on a tree stump. So we go back to it. We're all kind of gathered around in a semicircle around the tree stump and the guitar. And my brother, picks up the recorder and plays back what we get. And after he tells it that it can play the guitar and we're going to record it, it's this god-awful screeching noise. It was so loud that it actually was cutting out. It would hit the extreme loudness. It's called clipping. Basically, it gets so loud that it just clips off the volume. So it like almost cuts out. And it just was this awful, awful noise. We're listening to this. And we're looking at my brother, and while we're standing in that semicircle, I think I see his friend. There's somebody standing behind my brother. And at first I thought it was his friend, but a few moments later, his friend actually came up and walked up behind me from, totally different direction. I'm facing my brother, and I thought his friend was behind him, but he actually came from behind where I was standing. And I saw this person's face so clearly that I could actually see that it seemed like a younger face. There was no facial hair. There was no stubble, no 5 o'clock shadow or anything. So it seemed like it was somebody younger. It disappeared. So right after that, my brother, he starts pacing. He's saying, I feel like I'm going to die. I know that I'm okay. I know that I'm fine, but I feel like I'm going to die. I feel like I'm going to die. And he's getting very upset. I think he started crying at some point, and everybody freaked out, and they're like, we need to go. At the same time all this was going on, we were also seeing flashes of light in the woods and smelling cordite. So basically we were smelling burnt gunpowder and seeing what we thought looked like muzzle flashes in the woods in the same evening. I believe we also saw the gray pants prior to this happening, so it was extremely active. There was a lot of stuff going on. So this happens to my brother. Everybody freaks out. We need to leave because apparently my brother's getting possessed. Again, I'm like, why are we leaving? And I say to my cousin and my fiance, this is really cool and all, but I'm not going to believe that this happened. I'm not going to believe that this is actually a real thing unless it happens to me. You really need to watch what you say when you're in a situation like this. Because about 2 weeks later, we're back in the spring. My fiance's there, my mom, my brother, and the group that we would go ghost hunting with. We're in the spring and we're seeing this shaft of light, and it's like a glowing shaft of light at the tree line. So where we would be seeing this, we are if you have the parking area behind you, we would be over to the left side of where the spring is. The spring would be to our right. We are facing the tree line that's a little bit of a distance away. And in this tree line is this glowing column of light coming down in the woods. No moon. There is no moonlight. It was pretty close to a new moon, if I remember correctly. We're all watching. We're all seeing this. All of a sudden, I am overcome with a feeling of extreme sadness. And I start bawling. I am not a crier. I don't like, my husband would tell you that I am. I don't like to cry in front of people. I am not comfortable doing that. My family is one thing, crying in front of people that I'm friendly with, but, I only see once a week. That's not my thing. I don't like to do that. I'm a private person. So even though I consider these people my friend and I would see them weekly, they were not really truly in my inner circle of people that I'm willing to cry all over. That's basically how to put it. So I start bawling. Again, everybody's like, oh my God, something's going on. We need to leave. And I'm crying and I'm saying, this is so cool. And because it was like all of a sudden I'm like, this happened to everybody. I know what they meant. I'm having these emotions. I'm logically thinking that I'm not sad. I'm not the person who's actually having these emotions. They're just kind of being placed on me. I'm feeling somebody else's emotions. And it was really incredibly cool to experience. So we leave the area. Later, I learned that around that same time, I ended up later breaking up with my fiance. Looking back, I realized around the same time that this happened, he was actually telling other people that he didn't think he could go through with getting married. So I was already pretty confident that what we were seeing was the beginning manifestation of the lady in white. And had we stayed there, we probably would have seen a full-bodied apparition of the lady in white. But we left. And I think that we saw it because there was a promise that was being broken, unknown to me. Like, I had no idea that it was going on. It was not until much later that I discovered that it coincided with him coming to the realization he wasn't going to go through with it, but I didn't know yet. I want to share a couple of EVPs. I have 3 of them from Spangler Spring area. The first one I want to share with you was actually from April of 2000. I was sitting on the bench near what I call the Tuning Fork Monument. It's Indiana Monument. I call it a tuning fork because it kind of looks like a tuning fork. If you're looking at the parking lot, it would be to your right. They have a bench there, and I would sit on the bench a lot and do EVP sessions. I'd sit there by myself and just let it play. And so that's what I was doing in this particular instance. I was sitting there. I may have said, if there's anything you want to tell me, feel free. Then I recorded this EVP. So that was the EVP that I recorded, and in that, I'm not sure if you're able to make it out or not, but it says, help me please. So I'll play it for you again. And when I played this back, it actually upset me when I heard it, because all I could think about was the fact that there were so many people fighting in this war. There was so much emotion. It was brother against brother, family against family, neighbor against neighbor, and you just wanted it to end. It was 1863. It was probably getting really monotonous and old, and the death and destruction and the illnesses and the hard marches and the lack of food sometimes. I imagine it was just an awful thing to be going through, and especially because a lot of these people fighting were young men. And it just seemed to be such a pleading kind of recording that they wanted help, and I couldn't offer it. And it was, that one upset me when I played that back. So this next one, I don't remember exactly when it was. This one was one that we recorded in that area as well. So this one actually says, get back. I'll play it for you again. And then we have the third one. And this is one where I had been seeing some movement over by one of the tree lines there. And I actually thought I saw somebody in the trees. And I asked, was that you that I saw by the trees? So here is that EVP.
Is that you that I saw over here by the trees moving?
As you can hear, you can't really understand what it says, but it seems almost like I'm getting an affirmative answer to my question. Was that you by the trees? And it sounds like perhaps they're saying, you can't tell that it's yes, but it seems like it's answering in the affirmative. I'll play it one more time.
Is that you that I saw over here by the trees moving?
So that brings us to the next area of the battlefield that I'm going to bring up today, and that is the triangular field. A triangular field is located behind Devil's Den, and it is almost exactly an equilateral triangle, and it has like stone walls around it. It's very rocky, so it probably wasn't used much as a field for planting. It's possible that whoever farmed it used it as more of a field to keep an animal in, because with the stone fences and everything. It's not too far from Rose's Woods, and like I said, it's behind Devil's Den. This area ended up being controlled by the Confederates. It was actually a heavily contested area. There was a lot of fighting there. Eventually, after a great deal of combat, it was actually taken by the Confederates. So the Confederates were able to gain control of the triangular field. And that was during the second day of the battle. Now, the triangular field is probably my favorite place on the battlefield. Not quite as much now, because what the Park Service is doing is they are removing trees and returning the battlefield to the way that it looked during the time of the actual battle. So in this area, they've actually removed quite a few trees, and personally, while I think it's really cool to see things the way that they looked then, that's what photos are for, and there are photos of how it looked back then. I kind of felt that Gettysburg was a very beautiful park because of the trees that it had there and the landscape. So changing the landscape, I'm not real crazy about. I kind of preferred it the way it was. Like I said, this is like one of my favorite places. I was always drawn to it. I can't really say exactly why, but in talking to people over the last 30 years nearly, it seems like everybody has that one spot in the battlefield that they're drawn to inexplicably. So some people are drawn to Spangler Spring. Me personally, I'm terrified of Spangler Spring. In fact, there was an area down the road from the spring. I actually had this little mag light that was actually inscribed, and I dropped it late at night and I couldn't find it, and I refused to go look for it until daylight the next day, and I actually made my daughter go get it because I was too afraid to get out of the car and go find it. So Spangler Spring, it's very active, and so it was a place I wanted to go because of the activity, because that's why you're supposed to go, is to go find paranormal activity. But I did not like being in Spangler Spring. It made me extremely uncomfortable for some reason. The triangular field is totally different. I am very comfortable in the triangular field, which is rather odd considering the fact that I've had a lot of physical things happen in the triangular field, unlike other areas of the battlefield. Even though I've been grabbed, it's still my favorite place. So a lot of times I would take the dog. We used to have a large black lab. She was part lab and part Chesapeake Bay Retriever, which are a little bit larger than your typical Labrador Retrievers. And I would take her in the car. She loved to ride in the car. And we would go to the triangular field, and there was like a little hiking area. You could walk down by Devil's Den, the parking area in Devil's Den. You crossed over a bridge, and there's an old trolley path. And if you go to the right, you could follow that around, cross the stream, go around, and be able to come up into the triangular field. So sometimes I would take the dog and take her to walk there. And there used to be, when it was still a wooded area, there was a fallen tree there at the very bottom. And I liked to go to the bottom of the field and sit on this log and just kind of chill out. It was a very relaxing area for me. Many times while I would sit on the log, I would feel cold spots. And by cold spots, I mean like significant temperature changes, and it would move slowly. Like I would feel it moving from one side of my body to the other and then going away. And a lot of times I would smell pipe tobacco. It smelled like cherry pipe tobacco. And I don't mean the smoke, but just the smell of the tobacco itself. While I would be sitting there on the log, feeling these cold spots, smelling the pipe tobacco, the dog would be content to sit there and just chill out. And then all of a sudden she would jump up and she'd start growling at nobody. A lot of times I was by myself because most of the activity around the battlefield as far as people and tourists goes happens more on the weekends, and I would be there like during the week in the evening. So that was a little bit of the weirdness that happened there. It's funny because, like I said, most of the time I was comfortable in the triangular field. And then there was this one night we were investigating. It was in the winter. It was cold. And for whatever reason, I was really on edge. There was just a lot of anxiety. I just really was kind of nervous for some reason. And we were getting ready to head out of the triangular field. And I was kind of behind everybody. And I said, wait a minute. I do not want to be in the back because something's going to grab me from behind and I'm going to pee my pants. So I, ran up real quick and got in front of the line. And we're all walking up the hill because there is a hill to get up out of the triangular field. You walk uphill to get out at the gate. And as we're walking up, I walk into something. By something, I mean something or someone that is unseen. And I had a heavy starter jacket on that has the big pocket in the front, and I had my camera equipment in the pocket. So I walk into something and I stop because it's actually pushing the camera into my stomach, and there is something grabbing my biceps. And it was exactly what would happen if you accidentally walked into a person that you didn't notice and they grabbed your arms to steady you to keep you from falling and you were smushed up against them. That is the exact feeling that I had. That I had actually walked into a person who grabbed me by the biceps to keep me from falling down, and that I was standing right up against them so that the pocket and was up against them and was pushing the camera and stuff into my stomach. So I scream and I run to the back of the line because obviously I walked into something that I couldn't see and it grabbed me, which is exactly what I was afraid of. Other times I had been in the triangular field and I felt my hair being pulled. I have long hair. I would have them grab my ponytail and yank it, tug on the ends of my hair. I've had my ankles grabbed while I was walking. I felt like something would grab my ankle to where it almost tripped me. So I'd have my hair pulled and my ankle grabbed like I was being tripped. And still, this was my favorite place. I never really felt threatened. I didn't feel like I was being attacked. It almost was like a playful type of thing. I kind of always felt like I had friends there. I had ghost friends like Casper or something, and they were just teasing. It was more of a playful thing rather than a malicious thing. I know that might sound completely strange and weird, but that's truthfully how I felt. So in this area, it's known to cause issues with cameras. So when you go into the triangular field, it's not unusual for your camera equipment to stop working. And that's because there is a famous photo of a soldier leaning up against this, between two boulders with this little rock wall between them. And it's supposed to be like a sharpshooter. However, under further inspection, it was determined that the rifle the soldier had was not a sharpshooter's rifle. And in fact, there was a photo taken of the same soldier while he was laying dead in the triangular field behind this area. I'm going to try to find the photo to be able to post it on the social media. It's pretty famous. If you visited Gettysburg before, you've seen the photo there in Devil's Den. They have it on one of those plaques for you to look at and read the history. So it's said that the ghost is angry for the fact that the photographers at the time decided to use his body as a prop, which is basically what they did. They used his dead body to drag it around and prop it up to make more graphic photos. So several different times I've had issues with cameras, or somebody with me's had issues with cameras. I know one of the first times Kelly went with me to investigate, she had a problem with her camera. Now, Kelly minored in photography in college and was at the time way more advanced at photography stuff than I was, and her camera just completely stopped working. She could not figure out what was wrong with it. It wasn't doing what it was supposed to. But once we left the area, it ended up being fine. Other times I've had cameras stop working where it was like the batteries were dead, but they were brand new batteries. I'd put fresh batteries in, it still wouldn't work. I had them where it sounded like it was winding the film. I've had digital cameras not work where it just, you'd try to open it up, turn it on, and it would shut itself off. And there's also been reports that compasses don't work, though I've never actually experienced that particular phenomena myself. I've taken compasses in there, but I've never noticed any kind of issue with the electromagnetic field there. So I'm not sure about that, but that's what they say. And I know that there is a story that a local television crew was doing a Halloween episode, and they were there filming, and the camera itself started malfunctioning, and it would give different codes for what was wrong with it, and it was giving weird codes that didn't even coincide with what the manual had in there as problems. That's the other big thing in the triangular field areas. The cameras malfunction and compasses sometimes can't find true north. One of the craziest things that happened, there was a group of us. I think it was 5 of us. It was 5 or 6. I don't remember. Somewhere around there. We were walking down from the road there at Devil's Den, walking down towards the gate leading into the triangular field. And near the gate, there's a large boulder there. I walked past the boulder, and one of the people with me walked past the boulder. So we go through, and I noticed a couple other people in our group are slowing down. And, Kelly was with me, and she was behind me, and she's like, "Did you see that guy sitting on the rock?" And I said, "There was no guy sitting on the rock." She said, "Yes, there was a guy sitting on the rock." And I'm like, "No, there was nobody on the rock." We had to walk literally right next to the rock. If somebody had been on that rock, there's no way to not see them on the rock. There's nothing else there. It's a giant boulder. If somebody's on it, you're seeing it, period. So basically, the first 2 or 3 of us walking past this boulder did not see anybody on the boulder. But the 2 people behind us, and we were all single file, so I'm not talking like they were coming 5 minutes behind us. They were right behind us. See this man in full Civil War uniform sitting or leaning up against this rock. But not everybody saw him. He just kind of appeared and then disappeared. Kelly has said to this day she regrets not taking a picture because she at first thought it was a reenactor and she didn't want to like set off the flash in his face. I always just kind of say flash and take a picture, and that's just kind of what you do. But yeah, that was one of the weirdest things, is that half of our group didn't see anybody and the other half coming right in behind us saw him plain as day. There is a legend of a Confederate soldier that is seen in the area in full costume. I don't want to say costume, in full Civil War uniform. He actually gave a musket ball, a bullet, to a tourist there. And when the tourist had it analyzed, it was actually an authentic Civil War era bullet that had not been fired, which is a pretty rare thing to find. Was it that ghost? I don't know. Who knows? But I do have a couple of EVPs from the Triangular Field area. The first one is I ask, "Can you tell me your name?" And I get an answer back. So I'm going to play that for you.
Can you tell me your name again? I didn't quite understand it. If you say it slowly, we might be able to understand.
Really, you can't make out the name. But what I can tell you is that where it responds after I ask it to tell me the name, I slowed it down. And I originally thought this was like a one-syllable thing, but you can clearly hear 3 syllables in the first part of what it responds and then 1 syllable in the second. So it's almost like it's giving me a first and a last name. So I'm going to play it for you one more time. So like I said, I can't get it to get cleaned up enough to even guess at what it's saying, but you can hear the syllables in what it's saying. And then the next one I want to play, this is Bridget taking an EVP, and I want to say, I think she asks, can you tell me your name? I'm just going to play it for you. I don't want to give away anything, so I'm going to go ahead and play it for you now.
Hi, this is Bridget. Is there anybody here with me? If you are here, can you tell me your name?
So, not really a response, but I can tell you this, there was nobody there whistling at the time of that recording. There was no one whistling. So I'm going to play it for you one more time.
Hi, this is Bridget. Is there anybody here with me? If you are here, can you tell me your name?
Clearly, you can hear whistling in that response at the end of that EVP. And nobody was whistling. There was no one there doing that at all. There was hardly anybody there at all. It was in the fall, so it was after tourist season. Typically, we would try to stick to going to locations that weren't as crowded, and the Triangular Field back in the day wasn't very crowded at all. When the park was open later, it was hard to get a place to park anywhere near Devil's Den or the Triangular Field in the summer months. So that brings us to the third and final place that I'm going to discuss in this particular episode about Gettysburg investigations, and that is Sach's Covered Bridge. Now, Sach's Bridge had both the armies going across it at some point. The Army of Northern Virginia retreated across this bridge on July 4th after the battle. And they set up a field hospital. Not a field hospital, but there's a house just down from the bridge that was used as a Civil War hospital. And there's a field across from it. Now, actually, there are a couple houses there, but it was known as the Killing Fields because many people, they didn't die from their wounds and they didn't die from the battle, but they died from the treatment they received in these hospitals. Less than sanitary conditions. A lot of times the treatment is what killed you. You had a lot of men dying. The bridge itself, I think, was built in the 1850s. It's considered like one of Pennsylvania's most historic bridges, if not the most historic. And in 1996, it actually got swept downstream a little bit by a flood, and they were actually able to rebuild it. In fact, it was being restored at the time, and they ended up getting more funding to be able to build it up a little higher on its abutments to prevent any flooding in the future. It spans across Marsh Creek, and very picturesque bridge. I've taken tons of photos of it. It's one of my favorite things to photograph. I will definitely be sharing photos of this on social media. But Sachs Bridge, that was always the last place that we went because you could be out there anytime at night. Not so much anymore. There's been a lot of problems with vandalism and things, so you're not supposed to be there after sunset. There were a couple things about the bridge. There's stories that there were 3 deserters that were hung from the rafters in the bridge, and that they actually were just young boys and they were scared and they took off and they found them and they ended up hanging them as a lesson. If you desert, this is what's happening to you, which is pretty horrible if you think about it. Young kids who just really have no idea what war is all about, and witnessing all these horrible injuries and everybody dying around you. I can't even imagine having to go through that. There's a story that they were hung from the bridge. Then there's also another lantern here, similar to the one at Spangler Spring. When you would stand on the bridge and you'd watch, you would see a lantern come from up the road near where the houses that was the hospital, and you'd see this lantern coming down the road, and you would expect to be able to see a person carrying it once it got a little closer to the bridge. But once it got near to where it was close enough to see who it was, the light would disappear and there was never anybody there. We've had a couple of instances where we were chased by orbs that we actually saw. We saw them coming and shooting down the bridge. We had it on videotape where they shot into the camera. I've never had any sightings of any full-bodied apparitions there at all, but you would hear like pinging on the railing. There's stories saying it's some old guy in a wheelchair is there, somebody named Tennessee. I don't believe all the stories that I hear, because I think sometimes people make them up to fit what is happening, and they don't always make sense, and yet they keep sharing them regardless, and that's kind of like an urban legend in a sense. The big thing with Sach's Bridge here are the 3 EVPs that I have, because I consider 2 of these to be Class A EVPs. They're some of the clearest ones I've ever gotten. The first one I'm going to share, we were actually standing in this one corner of the bridge, and it's an area that a psychic had said that they thought that somebody had been hung from the bridge, and we were standing there discussing the story about the deserters, that it was children, that they were caught and they were hung as a lesson to everybody else about what would happen if you desert. So we take a recording, and this is the recording that I got. So I don't know if you can make it out or not, but what it says is, "Stop staring at me." I'm going to play it again. If you can hear that, like I said, it says, "Stop staring at me." And we kind of thought that maybe it was one or more of the boys that had been hung, and they really just were getting tired of people coming and staring at the corner where they died. This next one, my mom and brother were there at the bridge, and they often went on investigations with us on Saturdays. They had gone down towards the field hospital, and on the way back, they're just walking along, they're not talking, and my mom says to my brother, "Oh, we should have turned on the recorder to see what we got." And my brother says, "Well, I did. I had it on." He says, "I turned it off, but I don't want to listen to it until we get up on the bridge with everybody else." So they play it back, and this is what they got. So this one is probably one of the best recordings we've ever had. It actually, you can hear them kind of walking along, and then all of a sudden somebody whispers, "Be quiet." So I'm going to play it one more time. About the time that they got the recording was right around the time they were right near where the house is, that's the field hospital. And as you'd imagine, perhaps it's somebody there telling them to be quiet, keep it down. We've got wounded soldiers here. You need to be quiet. And that brings us to the last EVP that I have, and also one of my favorites. This was recorded on the bridge, and I actually had a group of scouts from Southern Maryland. Shout out to the scouts in Lusby. You're all probably adults at this point, but hey, thanks for having me take you out on the battlefield. It was a great time. They had contacted me, and they were camping at McMillan Woods, which is a youth camping area, and different youth groups can camp there. It was a scout unit, and they were coming to town, and they wanted to have a type of ghost tour, learn about ghosts. You can't give a tour on the battlefield and charge for it or anything, and I had no intentions of doing that whatsoever, because as I've mentioned previously, I love to pass on the knowledge that I've gained about ghost hunting to other people who are also interested. I especially like sharing it with kids, because I remember when I was a kid and there was nothing really for you to learn from. So you had like Hans Holzer's books and the Time Life books and anything the library had. I checked it out more than once because there weren't very many. You didn't have the internet, so you didn't have that option. And so when there are kids who are interested in this, I really want to try to give them what information I've learned to encourage their interest. So we went to a couple places on the battlefield. We ended up at Sach's Covered Bridge, and we're standing there. You know, we had some skeptics in the group. Most of the parents were a little skeptical about things. So the gentleman who was with us, he has a very deep voice, and he asks the question, if you are here, how many of there are you? Then there's a response. So let me play that for you.
If you are here, how many of there are you?
In that EVP, he asks how many of you are there, and the response is very clearly 7. When I played that back, the people who were skeptical all of a sudden started changing their tune because they were like, that said 7, and there was nobody here who said that. Nobody said the word 7. I didn't hear anybody say that word. And I am like, yeah, I know. That's what happens. That's what I've been telling you. We actually made believers out of a couple of people who otherwise were skeptical that this sort of thing even really happened. So let me play it for you one more time.
If you are here, how many of there are you?
We're going to end on that note with that EVP. Sure that in the future I will talk about some other experiences that I've had on the battlefield. This doesn't even really scratch the surface. When you've been investigating a place off and on for 30 years, you tend to accumulate quite a few stories about things that have gone on. I probably could fill an entire episode with Spangler Spring. That's how active it is, or was. I don't know if it's still that active. So that's going to do it for this episode of Lurk. I'm sure in the future I'm going to share some more about some of the investigations that I've done in Gettysburg, as well as other places that I've gone to. Even some more recent things that we may do. I'm hoping to be able to bring you some more short little episodes where I'm actually on location taking EVP and doing EVP sessions like I did with that bonus episode from Old House Woods. I would like to be able to do a few more of those for you. As always, you can find us wherever it is that you listen to your favorite podcast, and you can always find us at lurkpodcast.com. That is where you will also find links to our social media pages. We have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we have a YouTube channel. I recommend that you like or follow or subscribe, whatever it is that you do, to one or all of these. I recommend more than one because sometimes I post something on one that I may not manage to get on the other one. I try to do them all and get everything updated on all of them, but that doesn't always happen. Also on Facebook, we also have a Facebook group. It's a private Facebook group for lurkers, and currently there is a poll going on asking you which topic is your favorite that we cover. Hopefully you're a little bit more helpful than Angelina, Liz, and I believe Deborah, who also said that she agreed with Angelina and Liz that they were all their favorite. So that really helped out with narrowing things down. Just trying to get a feel of what everybody is most interested in so that if I'm trying to figure out what I may put more of in a month, that maybe I fill it in with whatever is the most popular. We also have merch. We have t-shirts, we have hoodies, long sleeve shirts. You can find that at Lurk Podcast Merch, merch.com. Please go there, order a shirt. It helps us out. The little bit of money that we make off of those, we turn around and put it back into paying for the podcast hosting. So that's going to do it for this episode. And as always, keep lurking.